the win of the day yesterday was Essendon's over Fremantle, their last quarter and their comeback when it looked like the Dockers had control of the game was first class. The game itself and the win against good opposition was meritorious, but given the backdrop of their performances for the couple of weeks leading into it, they needed to stand up and they were able to do it. And they had a happy Brad Scott who spoke after the game. Brad has consistently talked Essendon's performances down. He's consistently projected to the process. He doesn't want to be resultist, which is a word that he used probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. But the fact was that this group of players, his group, this team, representing this club at this moment in their progress, I suppose, in their history, needed to make a stand. They weren't going to progress from where they have been, and they're still not there yet. They weren't going to progress from where they have been in the last 5, 10, 20 years unless they were prepared to make a stand, and that's what we saw yesterday.
Do you agree with Brad Scott that it can do more damage to play finals and get bundled out than not make finals at all?
Yeah, well, I understand that could be a concern, but I think you'd prefer to get into finals and find out whether you've got the ability to take that step up. But playing in big games like this and performing in big games like this that they haven't been able to do in the last 4 to 6 weeks is an important part of it. I thought Caldwell was the guy that stood out to me, Jai Caldwell. I thought he had a role on Sarong at different times, Young at others, but Sarong, in that first half in particular, he was able to find enough of the ball and keep Sarong to less. But it wasn't so much how many possessions he won. It was the attitude that I saw him carry around the field. He was physical. He was combative. His energy was huge and high. And once the final siren went, he was the guy that that stood out the most to me about what it meant to him. So we know that Merritt's been there. We know I think McGrath's had a great year, and those two have stood up and potentially disproportionately copped the weight of expectation in the leadership department. We know that Sam Durham brings that energy and brings that never say die attitude. If you add a Caldwell to that and then a couple more decide to jump on, then you're starting to get a weight of numbers that can head you to the right direction. When Stringer and Gresham bring that sort of energy, you're a dangerous side. Langford is a consistency in that regard as well. But I reckon Brad Scott would have been rapt to be able to walk into the MCG on the Sunday afternoon and just highlight to his players, just look what happened to the team on the top of the ladder last night. They got absolutely smacked because they didn't want to compete, because they didn't want to do the work required to get themselves into the game. So it's not about us. It's about the process. It's about being competitive. It's about having a dip. And if you don't, we know what the result is. But if you do, well, let's find out what that could be. So I think he got a free hit there and a bit of a win, which you take as a coach. And I think if you hold that up, then Essendon the players don't feel like it's their issue or it's their problem. It's a competition-wide problem that if you don't turn up and compete, you're going to get smashed. So let's turn up and compete.
Zach Merritt had 2 clearances for the day, and it was his last clearance that was pivotal. Jake Stringer kicked 4 goals. The Bombers have Gold Coast, Sydney, both at Marvel, and then Brisbane to come. Freo, Geelong, GWS and Port to come.
Still a long way to go, but that sort of performance you can build off. And I think Brad was right. You don't necessarily... they don't need to play finals. You'd love to. Like if you're an Essendon supporter, yes, you want to see your team in September and you want to see them compete and win in September. But right now, and Brad has enunciated it really well, he's obviously narrowed it down to his playing group. We need to look after what we can look after, and then the rest will look after itself. So that was a good step. The last quarter yesterday was a great step.
What I like about that messaging from Brad Scott is he, Dave Barham, Craig Vozzo, they're all on the same page, that they want to develop a formula that succeeds in finals eventually, whether it's this year, next year, the year after, they're not sure. But they are absolutely aligned at Essendon, which hasn't been the case in recent years.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger picture, and you can't really do much about the bigger picture. When you go out with that 23, you've got to get it done.
The Swans.
Second one for me is Sydney, and we need to look at this in some shape or form. What does it mean for them? I mean, they didn't just get beaten; they were smashed. Port Adelaide have had a couple of outlier performances at their home deck. Western Bulldogs, 5 or 6 weeks ago or a month ago, and now Sydney. So you got to look at the flip side of the coin here. Port were really good, but Sydney were really bad, and it left John Longmire lamenting what he'd seen from his Chargers and wondering where to from here. Jake Lloyd put Sydney in front against the Brisbane Lions at the Gabba with minutes on the clock. They lost that by 2 points. They played the other form team in the competition at the moment, the Bulldogs, last week and lost by 39 points. They were well beaten. But then to walk out, to travel across and to walk out jog out onto the Adelaide Oval and to get smashed by 112 points, to lose contested possession by minus 24 in the first quarter, when you hang your hat on being a contested ball team, contest and defence is what the Sydney mantra has always been. It's what the Blood culture is developed on. This is the antithesis of the Bloods culture. So I'd imagine the conversations back in Sydney this week would be pretty strong, pretty harsh, because only 2 weeks ago they ran the form team in the Brisbane Lions of the competition on their own home deck to 2 points. And this, you could hear it in his voice. He wouldn't have faced a situation like this very often.
It's his biggest ever loss as a coach, and what a time to do it at the top of the ladder. It's the most bizarre result I can remember in footy. The sheer margin, the scale of it. You just haven't seen this in any time.
Well, I got home on the Saturday night from the Collingwood Carlton game and just put the shorts on and watched the 20 minutes, and it looked like it was a contest, a bit of an arm wrestle for about 15 minutes. But when there was ground taken by Port Adelaide, it was just given by Sydney, and there didn't look like there was a lot of fight back, and that is so un-Sydney-like from what we expect. So Warner's been really flattened down. Heaney has dropped off from his first half heroics throughout this season. They miss the energy and the cheekiness of a Papley in front of the ball. They miss the stability of a Rampy behind the ball. So there's no doubt that personnel plays an issue with this, and potentially more with Sydney. And I've spoken about it the last month, because they just play their best 23 every week. So if you play your best 23 every week and you don't look to rotate your team, you don't look at your depth, you're trying to build a squad of around 30 that you can go to, and maybe Sydney are a side that haven't exposed their depth as much as others, that rotate their players a little bit more, that rest their players a little more often, or might be a bit harsher on a drop-off on form. Sydney have prioritised consistency and time together for their best mix, and when they have injuries, it might hurt them more than others. But they'll be licking their wounds. And
how open are those wounds? How open are they?
We'll find out. So they play Collingwood up in at the SCG. So all of a sudden, Collingwood with that close win put the last two wins, Richmond and Carlton, put themselves back in the hunt somewhat. Their percentage, and they're a game away from sort of getting inside the 8, but they come up against a wounded Sydney side, which can go one or two ways, really. Sydney could come out breathing fire, or there might be 20 minutes of effort and then you can break through them. They've shown a soft underbelly, which nearly every side has. Sydney lost by 112 on the weekend. Brisbane's highest loss is 54. The Giants got them early in the year. Port have lost the game by 79 points this year. Brisbane's flogged them at Adelaide Oval. Geelong have lost by 10 goals twice this year. Freo have lost by 10 goals. The Bulldogs have lost by 8 goals twice. Carlton have been beaten by 9 goals this year. There's your top 8. So, and only GWS have their highest losing margin for the year is 29 points to Sydney, and 27 on the other occasion. So GWS have been the most consistent side. They're the only top 8 side that hasn't had a smashing at some point. So maybe that's just the season that we're going through.
Just no one's that good this year.
Well, or it's that even. It's that even that if you have a marginal drop off in effort and performance, or you miss a couple of players beyond the threshold of being able to cope with it, that it just runs away, as it did for Sydney on the weekend.
Port Ken Hinkley has a way of getting his players up, and they've been superb the last couple of weeks. How about travelling to Geelong, winning there, and then beating the Sydney Swans at home the next week? They've had a fantastic couple of weeks.
Yeah, I wasn't wrapped with their win over Carlton last week, and I thought they've got some.
Sorry,
warts.
Carlton. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so defensively, I thought Port Adelaide have got some warts, but they weren't challenged defensively this week. They played the game in their front half, and they looked amazing going forward. And it was one of those games where everything came together. That as equally as Sydney being challenged by that loss, Port Adelaide can find a lot out of that. They might find a level of confidence, of belief that unlocks their top end football. And
can they win it, Bucks? Port?
Well, yeah. Well, they're in the top four. They're currently third. If they can somehow jag a top two spot and get a home final, they're going to be there. They're going to be thereabouts. They've what's their draw? So they've got Melbourne next week at the MCG, and they'd want to perform on the MCG. They've got Adelaide in the showdown, and then they finish with the Dockers over at Optus. So, look, there's just so much. There's so much that is taking place, and you said about the ladder and what it looks like. It will change, and it will evolve in the next 3 weeks.
The ladder's fantastic. I've tried to do the ladder predictor a few times, and I've failed every time. I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the year, let alone this week.
But it adds to the storied history of the Carlton-Collingwood rivalry, and the fact that it was Pendle's 400th made it even more special for Collingwood people. And I get criticised for focusing too much on Collingwood sometimes, which I don't agree, but you can't look past the events of the week. The fact that Pendles has had such a good record in those milestone games. His teammates play for him. Geez, Carlton were gallant towards the end of the game. Like that momentum that they were able to gain from stoppage largely late in the third quarter and then through that last quarter. And then to have the game on anyone's boot, you would have nearly wanted Mitch McGovern to be the one. Maybe Charlie Curnow would have been the other one. But they came with a rush. But there's challenges for Carlton, and the game coming up against Hawthorn will be huge. We'll touch on that later. But I just thought the way Pendles carried himself, his performance, he had a roll on Cripps, and Cripps was still excellent. I thought that was a great one-on-one battle to watch. Nearly kicked a goal, a very un-Pendlebury-like goal, a banana goal on the left, which he would normally look to centre or find a teammate in position or a higher percentage option than what he went for, and it very nearly went through. But I thought he was amazing. I thought the club did it really well, and I thought the AFL showcased a champion of the game over 2 decades better than as well as they possibly could have.
When you ask Scott Pendlebury questions, he doesn't really give you a lot. He plays a very straight bat. At his press conference last week, he was asked, how is it that he can play this many games? And he said he's prepared well and all this sort of stuff. Can you give us an insight into how someone of his physique can play for so long and seemingly go on again next year?
Yeah, well, he's got, obviously he's an athletic specimen in regards to, strength and power. He's really strong through the core. He does all the little things to get himself right in recovery and in preparation. He hasn't relied on his speed. He hasn't relied absolutely on his endurance as such. The standout trait that, because speaking and thinking about him quite a bit over the last couple of weeks leading up to this milestone, his standout trait is not necessarily a football trait. It's his ability to emotionally regulate. He does not waste 1 ounce of energy, emotionally, mentally, or physically, going about his business.
What do you mean by that?
So if you can imagine, if you ride the highs and the lows, eventually it takes more energy. It takes more mental and emotional focus. It can mean that you can flatten out at times. If you ride this like in moments of high stress, I don't know. We don't have this, but his heart rate and his ability to not worry about the things that aren't important and to just focus singularly on the thing that is important. He does that with a minimum of fuss, and he idles at a lower frequency than anyone else would be. It allows him to make good decisions in the moment, but also means that he doesn't waste any energy. So if you look at that in a 4-quarter performance, there's no highs and lows. Like leading into a game, really even and balanced and organised. Through a game, even, balanced and organised. Post-game, yeah, like, we'll get to the crux of it. We'll let the rest go and then we'll move on. You do that over 20 years and you don't have the highs and you don't have the absolute lows, it might sound a bit dour that it's flat, but when you're idling at when you're idling at an 8 out of 10 and you're able to maintain that high performance because you utilise the energy that you've saved into the things that matter, I think that's been his superpower and the thing that he's done better than most.
That's fantastic insight. How long can he play for? Can he go another 2 years, do you think?
Well, I mean, he was one of the most important players on the field again on the weekend. If he's got guys like Nick Dacos around him, Geordie's out for the rest of the year, and we'll get to that. But when you've got powerful players, runners, Crisps, Hoskin Elliott, when you've got even a Noble and a Quainer that are buzzing past you to go forward, and when you've got forward targets that can be dangerous in front of you, he doesn't need to have the physical attributes. He just needs to have the ability to put people in space. And if he's got those people around him, there's no reason why he couldn't go on for another couple of years. He'll play for as long as the club need him and as long as he is contributing positively to it. And I wouldn't be putting a cap on it because he's got a way of finding the best at any given time. Yeah, Adam Kingsley would be really proud of his Chargers to continue to play our way. Well, for the large part of that game, Hawthorn prevented GWS from playing their way. But what they made a few little shifts, and I think that you can't acknowledge these any stronger than the impact they had. So Brett Daniels goes into the midfield and was significant in getting their game up and going. Their run off halfback and out of stoppage popped. Jesse Hogan, who had been great all game, got more supply and he became even more dangerous. Toby Green, when you've got those guys in front of you and you can get enough run through the midfield, you're going to be dangerous. But look, I did think that Hawthorn just dropped their guard a little bit. They were 28 points up. They'd kept the Giants to 5 goals for the first 3 quarters. I just felt like they were just so open in that first 3 or 4 minutes of the last quarter. They allowed the Giants a little bit more time and space than they'd had for the majority of the game. And it was just enough to get the Giants' tails up. Their momentum picked up. Jack Buckley's tackle on Sicily late in the game, when Hardwick and Sicily, who were both defenders, had run forward of the players. Like, it'd be interesting to unpack tactically, that Green, got to win, got to score to win mentality. And it looks like most of the backs were on the run in front of the ball and maybe, just saying, well, we just need to outnumber as hard forward as we possibly can. But, the Giants have been in great form. Hawthorn by 2 points, Melbourne by 2 points, Gold Coast in that game against them 39 points, Richmond, Carlton. They've got 5 wins in a row, which is not easy to do in this competition, so they're in good shape.
And they're back in the flag hunt. Carlton, where to from here? Yeah,
so I think that the last part is just generally around Carlton and Hawthorn and the game that we've got coming up. Carlton have put themselves in a vulnerable position, but you've now got 8th v 9th going into this must-win game. It's 8th v 10th. It's largely an elimination final. I mean, it's an elimination final for Hawthorn. They've got to win their next 3, given their drop off on their close loss to GWS on the weekend and their percentage. But the Blues they've got to find a way as well. Like they've now put themselves in a vulnerable position. Western Bulldogs above them are one of the form teams in the comp, and they look like they're heading up. Carlton have dropped off, and they've dropped games that they would have liked to have won. But Essendon, Hawthorn, and Collingwood will be eyeing off Carlton's position in that top 8. And the fact that we've reached, we always do, but we reached this time of the year. Carlton have so much talent. They just haven't been able to find the synergy with and for each other, as we saw in that second half of last year, that they took into finals and looked, pretty hard to beat for the most part through September last year.
Is that coaching?
Well, it's
what is that? Why do you not have synergy if you've got so much talent?
It's an age-old question, but if you've got talented players, the perception is that they're more worried about their own performance than team. But I wouldn't suggest that. I thought Collingwood were able to disarm Carlton with their defensive structures, and Carlton just didn't look like they could move the ball as effectively as they may have otherwise. McGovern and Newman become important in that, and but then they can be exposed a little bit defensively. They need more. You need more out of Charlie Curnow as many goals as he's kicked in the last 3 years, as high as he's been up in Coleman's. The one mark and the asterisk that he needs to look at, and this game against Hawthorn is an opportunity against an undersized defence. He'll probably get Sam Frost, or Sam Frost might get Mackay, and it might be a Sicily Curnow matchup. But you're going to get, if you're one of the gun players in the comp in the front half of the field, you're going to get a gun defender. But these are the games that he hasn't quite been able to step up for yet. And his teammates and his team need him more now than ever. Yeah, and Steve obviously watches his own side really closely. And I think that Carlton had great synergy for the back half of last year. And that was after they were being hauled over hot coals for having the talent that they had but not being able to produce. And they weren't winning at all in the front half of 23. Since then, they've been able to show gutsy performances and eke out really good performances. The back half of last year, the momentum that they had, they were hard to move the ball against. They defended really well. Like Walsh comes into the side, their midfield looks strong. They have missed personnel. De Koning is not a small out for them.
It's a big out, but I worry about this window, this premiership window.
Yeah,
you don't like that term.
No,
but they have a chance to win a flag this year, and they might not even play finals. Like, it's been a big drop off the last 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, and look, but they could win their next 3 and then finish top 4 and then go bang bang. I mean, we don't. They've got that ability, but there is form, and their recent form is that they're dour at the moment. They're not finding their best. Chera goes out. They've missed him with injury. Maybe they are a little bit one pace in the midfield, but if you're one pace in the midfield, you've got to have speed on the flanks. So you've got to utilise that as much as possible. But they got criticised for going long to their big fellas,
and they don't have the smalls,
and being too predictable. But I like that. I like when they go long to their bigs. It makes it predictable to their small players. They play a territory game. It sets their defence up. And I think you want to play broken play football if you're Carlton.
Yeah.
Welcome stoppage, welcome contest, and try and reduce transition as much as you possibly can. And a shift like that can make a significant difference, and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here.
Carlton v Hawthorn this week coming up. I know Hutchie tweeted yesterday about a potential Hawks radio and Blues radio, which would be unbelievable to listen to.
Why not? Let's get
this
it done.
weekend on SEN.